Welcome to my show. I am with a guest called Amanda Udis-Kessler. Amanda, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you very much, ma. We know you are a award-winning um hymn writer and song composer. Can you tell us more about that career and how you achieved it, ma?
Sure. So I am very fortunate to have grown up with a father who was a professional songwriter for a while. And when I was a child, he taught me how to write songs. So I've written plenty of songs, but I was never very good at writing kind of popular songs or love songs or things like that. I just wasn't very original. And when I decided to start writing worship music and hymns and things like that, I just found that I had a good feel for it. So I wrote a few, 25 years ago for a little hymnal supplement, and they all got published. And I thought, okay, I should remember that that goes well for me. And then back in I think 2019 or so, there was an announcement of a hymnal that was going to come out, and a friend of mine wrote to me and said, "You should send them some hymns." So I wrote some more hymns, and two of those were accepted in that hymnal. And at that point, I just said, I think I have a good feel for this, so I think I should keep doing it. And now I have a website that has about 150 pieces of music on it, and it's freely available for people, so people can always contact me if they want information about that.
All right. I want to ask, what was the thing that really inspired you to become that music composer?
Well, so again, growing up with a father who wrote music, when I was fairly little and I was over at his house sometimes, he would just sit at the piano and play, and I thought that was magical. And so that inspired me to want to learn how to improvise at the piano, and I thought his music writing was really amazing. But the other thing is, he taught me that writing songs is a matter of craft. So I think we think about creativity as being very much about inspiration, and that's part of it. But there's a lot of labor, there's a lot of perspiration as well as inspiration. And so um, I I learned to really love the craft work and the labor of writing songs, the making of decisions, the trying to figure out what the right word is in a particular place, or, is there anything new left to say about anything? Because there are millions of songs out in the world. So how can I put my own stamp on things? So yeah, I think those are some of the important things. And then, creative projects are difficult. They require a lot of effort, but there's nothing like finishing up a piece and listening to it and going, I created that. It's just magical.
All right. I want to ask, when you were having this music career, do you have any issue when it comes to, relationship, and how did you try your best to, overcome this area? Or when you're having this career, you didn't just focus on anything like that?
So I think for me the there is a challenge about creativity, and I bet other creative people have their own versions of this. Um, for me, what has always been hard has been knowing when the right time is to put in the effort, and when the right time is to wait for some inspiration. Because there's also a kind of patience and a kind of listening. And it isn't all labor, it's also being open to kind of receiving insights about what something should be like. And so, something I've had to learn over the years is that I actually have a kind of relationship with my song projects. Now, that might sound really strange, but I have to listen to them and what they're telling me. And I'll give you an example. There was a song I wanted to write called Into the Gray. And for whatever reason, I really wanted to use the British spelling of gray, Grey. And I couldn't write the song and I couldn't write the song. And then one day I picked up the piece of paper that all it had on it was the song title. And I crossed out Grey and I wrote down Gray. And I thought, okay, I think I need to change my use of that word. And I'm not making this up. An hour later, I had the complete lyric. So all I had to do was be open to literally changing the spelling of a word, and then everything unfolded and my mind became clear and I started writing, and now that song is on one of my albums, and it turned out to be a reasonably good song. But I had to actually listen to what the song was telling me about itself. And I am a pretty impatient person. So for me, one of the big struggles is learning how to be patient. One of my other big struggles is learning how to take advice from other people to make my music better. Because, you know, I, like many creative people, have probably a bigger ego than I should. And so it can be a challenge to humbly go to someone else and say, how can I improve this lyric, or how can I improve this music? And I have an example of that as well. I wanted to write a song that involved some language about gardening, but I myself am not a gardener. I am from a very urban part of New York City. I've never grown anything in my life. So I wrote the first verse, and I actually took it to my songwriter father and said, and he actually, he's deceased now. This is years ago, but he was a gardener. And so I took this lyric to him and said, what do you think? And he laughed at me and said, this is terrible. You clearly don't know anything about gardening. And I said, well, yes, that's true. But then instead of just going away and sulking, I asked him, what should I change? What could I make better? And I asked some friends of mine who were gardeners what they would make better. And eventually I rewrote the first verse to really take into account all the advice I'd been given. And now it's probably one of my best songs because it has an accurate understanding of gardening that I got from the people I talked to. So now you wouldn't listen to the first verse and then turn the song off because it was ridiculous. So creativity has this very strange mix of, you need to have confidence that you actually can create whatever you're doing, whether it's a song or a book or whatever it might be. So you need to feel pretty good about yourself as someone who has ideas and someone who has the competence to create whatever you're creating. But you also have to be humble, and you have to be open to the input of other people. And you have to be willing to, you know, labor and put in an effort, but you also have to be willing to be kind of patient and wait and see, how does it feel like it's going? And, you know, so there's this tension within creativity. And I have gotten better at living with that tension over the decades, but it took a long time. And I think what I've written in the past 10, 15 years is just much better than almost anything I wrote as a younger person, because I've grown up a little bit.
All right. I want to ask, in your release, do you have more releases you are planning to release, or do you have any releases in the future? You are not just thinking about any release currently.
So I put all of my music onto a website where it is freely available. And what I do, I did my third album in 2017, but I don't really do albums anymore because honestly, I don't think people listen to albums that much. So if people want to listen to sort of open-hearted, justice-focused worship music, what I do is I have professional musicians make recordings and videos of my things, and then those are all on my website. And so if someone wanted to find out about my music, what I would actually encourage them to do is email me. I will give you my email address and say it aloud, and then someone could contact me and I would give them the website and tell them a little bit about how to use it. So if someone did want to find out more about my music, they could contact me at Udis-Kessler.com. And that after the @ sign, it is spelled AMANDAUDISKESSLER.com. So again, if any of your listeners would like to encounter my music, I'm happy to interact with them and share things.
Thank you, Ma. I want to, change the subject a little bit, Ma, if I can. I want to ask, how do racism, how are this manifest in our society today?
Racism. So that is such a big topic. I think I'm going to try to answer that as a sociologist, which is what my academic training is in. So any form of inequality that is systemic, including racism, winds up coming down to largely to three kinds of injustices or unfairnesses. One of them is the way people are treated by institutions. So if you think about discrimination, that would be a really important example. In the US, police officers treat Black and Hispanic and Indigenous people much worse than they treat white people. So the police is just one example. There are many other institutions, but particularly African Americans, which is the kind of racism I know the most about. African Americans face discrimination in hiring, in looking for a new home, in treatment by the criminal justice system, in treatment by the healthcare system. So there's many forms of discrimination. And generally what discrimination comes down to is that someone who has some kind of position of authority or decision-making power can decide who they're going to treat well and who they're going to treat badly. Those are often white people, because in the US, white people are often in positions of power. And white people often, unfortunately, choose to treat Black and brown people worse than they treat other white people. So that's discrimination. Then there is the cultural part of racism, which is all of the messages we receive about what different people are like. And again, racism looks different in different countries, but in the US, there are kind of 3 or 4 assumptions that white people are taught to have about people of color. We are taught that people of color are less competent than us, less moral than us, more dangerous than us, and more criminal than us. And none of those assumptions are true, but it is what white people are taught. That is how racism works culturally. So that means that one reason why police officers treat, say, African Americans worse than white people is they assume that Black people are more likely to be criminals. So there's this sort of cultural assumption, and it goes along with the institutional behavior. Finally, one of the last kind of major ways that racism works, and these intersect, and they're very complicated because they play out across time and space. So all over the country, all the time, these things are happening. The third kind of inequality here, and I sometimes call this individual power. It comes down to credibility. So who does an average white person think is more credible? Who is a white person more likely to believe? A white person or a member of a BIPOC community? And that phrase BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, in case your listeners haven't heard it. So for example, if I am in a group of a racially mixed group of people and a white person makes a racist joke, and there's, let's say, an African American person in the group, and that person says, "That's not funny, that's racist," which they should totally say because, no one should make racist jokes. But if someone made a racist joke and then a person of color objected to it, the other white people in the group would be more likely to find the joke funny and to think that the person who was objecting just didn't have a sense of humor. So in that sense, they sort of would get to choose between, who do I take more seriously here? A white person who made a racist joke, or say an African-American person who objected to the joke. And one of the ways racism works is that the white person who made the joke is going to be given more respect by other white people in this situation. So all of this, of course, is a moral travesty. It's not a good thing. I'm not saying any of this happily, but it is my understanding of some of the main ways that racism works in the US.
All right, thank you so much for that. I want to ask, is there any way, someone can combat it, as an African, like someone can combat it, maybe as a black or any area? Is there any way someone can combat such?
Okay. Your voice faded out for a minute. Were you asking about combating racism? Was that the
Yes,
question?
exactly, ma. Yes, ma.
Okay. I'm sorry. So there are many things that white people can do to work against racism, and many of them are quite uncomfortable. So we might want to sort of come back and talk about what's hard about doing this. But the most important things that a white person can do to begin working against racism is to acknowledge that it is a real thing, that it is a real phenomenon, that it is very extensive across our society, and that it really deeply harms and sometimes kills members of BIPOC communities. So just acknowledging that racism exists and kind of understanding how extensive it is really where we start, because we can't do anything if we don't understand it. And so that means that we who are white have to educate ourselves a lot about the history of racism in the US, the way it works today. And again, it works in these different ways that I talked about. So it's really helpful to understand how discrimination works. It's really helpful to understand cultural messages that are racist, and then to sort of understand who gets the benefit of the doubt in a given situation. Once we know all of those things, so we start educating ourselves. For me, it meant reading, hundreds of books and watching movies and YouTube videos and reading and listening to podcasts and just doing a lot of self-education. So that kind of helped me get to where I am. Then we have to start figuring out how we can actually oppose racism in our daily lives. Like, what actions can we who are white take? And again, it kind of goes back to those three categories. So if I have any sort of position of authority where I am making decisions about someone else, I can make sure that I am not being discriminatory. I was a college professor for a little while, and so it was really important for me to make sure that I wasn't discriminating against students of color in my class and that I was treating them fairly and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Then whenever those of us who are white and want to work against racism find these assumptions in ourselves or encounter them in other people, we have to challenge them. And I'll give you a really simple but unfortunate example. I was raised in New York City in a race and class diverse neighborhood. And I'm afraid I was, to some extent, taught by my parents to be suspicious of Black and brown people. And so if I see a white person running down the street really fast, I don't assume they just stole something. But sometimes if I'm in an urban area and I see a Black or brown person running down the street really fast, my first thought might be, I wonder if they did something wrong. And that's terrible that I think that, but I was trained, I was taught to think that. So what I have to do at that point is stop myself and go, Amanda, why are you assuming that this person is a criminal? That is an assumption. It's not based on any evidence. Don't think that. And so over time, I've come to loosen some of my racial assumptions and let some of them go a bit. And then finally, there are many other things that one can do, but in terms of how racism basically works, the other thing I can do is if someone from a BIPOC community tells me something, I can believe them. I can give them the benefit of the doubt. I can trust their credibility, and that's really important. I should not trust them any less than I would trust anyone else. So if you came to me and said, I have had a racist experience, and here's what it was, my role in that moment is to believe you and support you and affirm that that was wrong, whatever happened, and ask if I can help. So that's sort of another piece of this. The main other thing that white people can do once we sort of understand how all of this works is we can put some of our time and money and energy and resources literally into supporting other people's work against racism. So for example, sometimes people offer to pay me for my music. Someone might, for example, commission me to write them a new hymn or worship song. And if they want to pay me money, I don't take the money. I tell them to donate it to a racial justice organization instead of taking it myself. So that is a way that I can use a resource that would have come to me, and I can give it immediately back to communities of color.
All right, thank you very much for that. There was something that popped in my mind when we were having this conversation. There is a term we use in this place that I am. They call it jakpa, and what it means is that people who believe that they can't, find a way of living in the country, they decide to just take their things and go either to the United States or other white countries just to find a better life. What can you say about that aspect when it comes to maybe them not aware about something like this? What can you say about that, man? Are you hearing me?
Um, Unfortunately, your voice cut out for most of
Okay.
that. I'm so sorry. So you might have to repeat the question, and then
Okay.
I'll try.
Okay. I said there is a term we use here in our country. We call it jackpot. What it means is that people who believe that they can't, stay in this country because of the situation, they decided, to leave the country.
Mhm.
It's happening very rapidly, most especially in my country, very rapidly. I want to ask, like, due to the maybe the less awareness of things like this, what, in your own opinion, can you say to, such people who are ready to say, okay, I just don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go abroad. What is the thing to you can just say? I'm just asking now.
Sure. So it really would never be my place to say to someone that they should not
Yeah.
try to find the best life for themselves that they can. So I would never, no one has ever asked me this question before, so I'm just answering it off the top of my head. But I would never say to someone, you should not go to another country and try to find a better life for yourself. I think really the question I would ask them is, do you think that, if you went to a different country, the things that you would lose by leaving the country you're in, is it still going to be better for you if you go to another country? So, if I felt a need to move to a different country, I would kind of lose the whole life I had built up. And so my only question to someone would be, what is the least bad option for you? If the least bad option is to move to another country and start over, then of course that is what that person should do. But if it means that they kind of lose everything they have, I would hope that they would have really sort of thought about, are there any things they can do rather than leaving if leaving means losing everything. And if the answer is leaving is the least bad option, then I would absolutely, support them in doing that and try to see how I could, help them if they were someone I knew.
All right, I want to ask, how does racism, how does it affect someone mental well-being? And is there any political influence when it comes to um, racial in racial inequality?
Um, well, sure. I mean, in terms of what it has to do with politics, actually, that's really complex. And I can only talk about the US here. But there is a sort of cycle of the reproduction of inequality through racism, because what happens is when white people in power use their power to lock racism in place, one of the things they do is they wind up disempowering people of color. A really clear example of this is in voting suppression in the United States. So lots and lots of states have changed their laws and their practices to make it harder for Black and brown people to vote. It is a moral horror that this has happened. It is a terrible, terrible thing. And it just shows how deep the racism goes. But one of the things that happens is if white people in power can keep Black and brown people from voting, then they maintain a stronger hold on their own power. So if I were an African American person, I would use my vote to try to vote out racists and vote in politicians who are opposed to racism, right? That would only make sense. But if I don't have my vote because my vote is being suppressed in this hypothetical example, then I have lost the power to try to vote out the racists. And so part of what has happened is white people who are opposed to racial equality have kind of worked together. The ones in power have used their power to make it harder for Black and brown people to vote. And then the white people who are voting, who are opposed to racial equality, use their votes to keep re-electing politicians who are opposed to racial equality. And so racism kind of gets locked in. And one thing we know about voter suppression is it isn't just about laws having to do with voting. It isn't just where you have a voting machine. It isn't just whether you can vote ahead of time. It isn't just whether you can, mail in a ballot. There's all of that stuff. But we also know that racial segregation, so geographical segregation, where Black and brown people are kind of crowded into communities that are mostly Black and brown, racial segregation makes it easier to suppress the vote. So aside from racial segregation being bad for many, many other reasons, it's also bad because then you can target certain neighborhoods. If you are, racist and you want to suppress the Black and brown vote, then you can target certain neighborhoods to keep them from voting. So it has a huge political implication, because what it means is people in power can use their power to stay in power and keep harming Black and brown people. And when Black and brown people are disempowered, so they don't have access to vote, for example, one of the main ways of changing the system is taken away from them, which is horrible. So this is really a political issue as well as a moral issue. And it means that someone who wants to be a good citizen and exercise their right to vote, if they're white, the odds are that they're going to get to do that. And if they're Black or brown, they may very well not, depending on what state they live in. So, yeah, it's a tough topic.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to ask, generally, what's if there's any advice you would love to give, what can you say is the advice? Just generally.
So what I would generally say about racism would be that white people need to be willing to be uncomfortable but brave. We need to be willing to learn a lot and face the reality of how bad it is. And then we need to learn to be generous and self-sacrificing and do what we can to make the world a more just place, and understand that racism benefits us unfairly and that we ought to be working against it. And since we started with creativity, I'll also give a piece of general advice about creativity, which is that I believe everyone has the capacity to be creative, and I encourage people to really think boldly about how they might like to kind of add to the world and what ideas they have and how they would like to share their hopes and yearnings, and learn some ways to do that and see what inspires them and just follow their inspiration.
All right, thank you very much, Ma. I just want to ask this last question. My apologies. If there is anything you would have loved to inherit from your forefathers or from the forefathers, from the ancestors, like anything, it might be naturally. What do you think that thing should have been in this current time we have now?
So in terms of what I feel we honor from our ancestors, is that how you mean?
Yes, what you feel like you should have gotten from them, something like that.
What I should have gotten from them. Okay. So I actually feel as though I have gotten my creativity and my yearning for justice and my resilience from my ancestors. So I am so grateful to my parents and their parents and their parents and all of my ancestors for being people who were creative and thoughtful and kind and strong. And so that is what I believe I got from them, and I am so thankful for it.
All right, Ma. I really appreciate it for the little time you've given to me. Thank you very much, Ma Amanda. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ma.
Have a lovely day.